Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with legendary composer, arranger, and trumpeter Charles Tolliver. Over the course of our conversation, he was very candid about his beginnings in 1963 with the great Jackie McClean and how that break led to bigger gigs with cats like Sonny Rollins. He told me who his jazz heroes are, why he loves jazz, and much, much more. Please dig this interview, my friends.
So I just want to start off at the top and ask, what has been going on with you lately?
Well, like I've always been doing, playing that trumpet. Just like the rest of my colleagues, you perform wherever you can.
Has it been pretty busy lately?
No more than usual. I mean, you know, in the performance business of straight ahead jazz, as they like to call it, I mean, things can always be better, but not so bad.
Right on. So you grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. And I want to kind of get an idea of what was it like growing up in Jacksonville that gave you kind of this love of jazz that you've had your whole life?
Well, I think probably I was scatting by the time I was 5 years old because my moms and dad, they had the original jazz at the Philharmonic 78s, those big old thick old 78s. And I used to sit down and listen to those. And for me, the rest is history. You know, that had me in my ear and brain. And, you know, a few years later, my grandmother had me a little cornet, and trumpet became the instrument of choice. And, you know, through high school and college, and then, you know, fortunate to get a break kind of early on, and that's basically it. I mean, there's a big story in there, but that's the short of it. You know?
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. So it's safe to say that since you were a kid, your dream was to grow up to be a musician?
Well, it wasn't a dream. It was, I was ordained by the powers of be. You know, that I mean, each individual, there's something that clicks in. That either you start to do that right away throughout your entire life, or it clicks in later. That it clicked in for me. Certainly, by 5 years old, I pretty much knew I was going to be doing something with music. You know. So.
Yeah. So was the big break for you in '64 when you played with Jackie McClean?
Actually, '63, when I met him for the first time, and you know, started to sidekick with him, and then of course the recordings that came up after that, starting in '64. Right
on. So you were majoring, you were a pharmacy major at Howard University, and luckily you went over to music. How did all of that happen?
Well, I was going to go over to music anyway. I always loved, as probably a lot of musicians, they like, because you have to deal with really numbers in your brain, you know, negotiating chord changes. And, you know, so a lot of those guys, my colleagues, are great with mathematics and chemistry and all that other stuff. But music is you know, everything congealed as a musician. And, you know, I liked watching in the old days when the pharmacist was mixing the medicine, you know, the apothecary, you know, putting all those formulas together and mixing it. And so that appealed to me, you know. It's about the numbers, you know, O's and ones. And so, you know, I'd love to be able to do that. But most of my time outside of my pharmacy classes was spent in the fine arts building. So, you know, at a piano somewhere, you know, it scouts deep down in the fine arts building. So by my third year, you know, I you know, it was like, you know, a horse chomping at the bit. You know, when you're in, you know, like the jockey he's got this stallion on the 8th pole, you know, and he asks him, you know, okay, let's go. Yeah. So, the jazz music, you know, just propelled me out of Washington, D.C. back home, you know, jumping in. Which was fortunate because that was at the right moment, and I was, you know, in, sort of a camaraderie of people, you know, movers and shakers, so to speak, at the time, who, you know, sent me to Jackie. Otherwise, had I arrived a little bit later into that, I might not have, you know, been steered towards him, you know. So, you know, everything at that point worked out, you know, okay for me.
Yeah. So from those beginnings, you move on to play with Roy Haynes, Sonny Rollins, Art Blakey, and all kinds of cats like that. What was it like to perform with them? How did that make you grow, not only as a musician, but as a person, to be around that kind of talent?
Well, you know, during the incubation of, you know, modern jazz, of course, you know, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, when a new fellow came on the scene, they would check you out, and if you were up to snuff, you know, eventually, if you kept coming around or you asked to, you know, sit in or whatever, you probably would get a call on something, and so, you know, after I got my break with Jackie, you know, those during the LP days, of course, those things were, you know, being played a lot, and Roy Haynes was looking for a trumpet player at a particular time, and, you know, he had heard about me, and so I got a chance to do that, and then lo and behold, one day, you know, which is one of the great moments of my life, you know, getting a call from Sonny Rollins out of the blue. Which, you know, and, you know, his nickname is Nuke, you know, so, you know, we'll say Nuke, it says, okay, you know, Charles Tolliver, it's your time. You know, he had a funny way of delivery of his, you know, the way he talked, you know, so.
Yeah.
And from there, I worked better part of a year with Art Blakey. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to make a recording with him. He was in between, you know, recording dates, and so. But I mean, that was a great experience. And then, of course, Gerald Wilson out in California, Oliver Nelson, and then, you know, the trumpet player's dream, Max Roach, you know. So. And Horace Silver, you know, after that. So, I mean, I couldn't ask for a better, you know, kickoff those first 5 years or so of my career.
Yeah, yeah. So you played with what the world would consider jazz heroes. Who would you consider your jazz heroes?
Oh, there are many. There are many, and on every instrument, you know, not just trumpet. But you know, just for sake of, you know, time, I mean, you know, my original hero was Charlie Schaefer's because you know, as a toddler sitting and listening to, you know, Jazz the Philharmonic, he was on there as well as Little Jazz, you know, Roy Eldridge, and of course Dizzy Gillespie. But Dizzy was a little bit over my head at 5 years old. You know, Dizzy didn't click in until I guess I was about 8 or 9, so it wasn't that long ago. and Kenny Dorham, of course, just magnificent. You know, Fats Navarro, magnificent, and you know, Clifford Brown. You know, you don't even have to mention that for, you know, talking about trumpet. You know, and of course, Miles Davis in many different ways, not just as trumpet, but as a band leader. Donald Byrd, B. Morgan, and of course Freddie Hubbard. You know, so
right on. Let me ask you this: what's the greatest thing for you about waking up every day?
Trying to beat up on the trumpet, I would think. You know, because each time, you know, the trumpet player touches it, you know, I mean, it will never allow you to take it for granted. It is the most, as far as I'm concerned, unforgiving of all the instruments, because you're required to give airflow, keep a good tone, and you have this steel that you have to deal with, this piece of mouthpiece steel. So I would say, at some point, when I wake up, it's not beat up on the trumpet, but lovingly urge it to be kind to me.
Let me ask you this. It's a simple question. Why do you love jazz?
Jazz music, not just the word jazz, but, basically starting with, 1899 or so with Pops and Duke coming on, and all of those original guys who figured a way how to make the music swing, which is one of the reasons why it was called swing music, swing era and all of that, and it took someone like a Charlie Parker, although probably there were a couple other guys whose names have been thrown around in the historical texts of the of this music, who were probably trying to do what he was doing, but he had mastered it, and it took us into the modern era of the music, and then bebop and so on. And we all got these names thrown around, but I love the ability to have dealt with the formula, that foundation that was laid down. Basically, like in classical music, Bach is the all-time great as far as I'm concerned with classical music. He laid down the foundations for, the Scalia thing that we use was in classical music, although it took some 50 to 80 years for some, Mendelssohn to say, hey, you guys slept the real deal here, So, the basic foundation of the music, as far as I'm concerned, must be kept no matter what new things or so-called new things come into play. And, John Coltrane is an example of taking Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker's mode of things and absolutely giving us, as far as I'm concerned, along with Joe Henderson and a few others, just an exquisite look at, the music that's called jazz, in total excellence, Clifford Brown, by example. And so what I love about, jazz music is that it encompasses so many facets of really American life, from 1900 or even a little bit further back until now, even through the so-called avant-garde period, because the foundations of the music had to suffer some bombardment, to see if it would, survive and and assimilate, even some of that, of course, into the idiom. And so I would say that all of the different generations, of this American art form, I love, but my preference is, of course, the generation that I came up in. I think it's incumbent upon those of us who are left from the generation to ensure that that's not lost. And we are certainly fortunate to have someone like Barry Harris, God bless him, who's still with us. And he's just magnificent, because the theory of the music is laid out so wonderfully, from Bud Powell onward, so all those kind of things I love about the music.
That's beautiful. That's perfect right there. That's a perfect way to put kind of a period on this interview. I thank you, Charles, for taking some time to open up your world and talk with me a little bit. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over America giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Charles for his music, his stories, and his cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino on the iTunes Store, or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.